I have a story that still haunts me years after it happened. It's grounded in a well-documented phenomenon that I can't explain, a phenomenon you've probably heard of: sleep paralysis. The general understanding is that it happens when your brain is awake, but your body is still asleep. You can't move, and sometimes you experience hallucinations. Sounds terrifying, right? But for me, it went a step beyond that. I had just moved into an old Victorian house that had been converted into apartments. The place had a certain charm, crown molding, antique fixtures and all that. But there was also a heaviness to it, like the air was thick. Previous tenants had come and gone quickly, which I initially attributed to the high rent or poor insulation. I should have done more digging. My first night there was restless. The atmosphere felt suffocating. Around 3 a.m., I woke up but couldn't move a muscle. My eyes darted around the dim room, catching the digital glow of the clock. And then, at the foot of my bed, I saw her. A woman, dressed in what looked like clothing from the late 1800s, staring at me intently. As real as she seemed, I assured myself it was a hallucination, one of those terrors that accompany sleep paralysis. Then she spoke. "You need to leave." Her voice was as clear as day. Finally, the paralysis broke, and I shot up in bed, soaked in sweat. There was no sign of her. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. But that didn't explain the feeling of dread that hung in the room. I even joked about it with friends and colleagues, turning my experience into a campfire tale. They laughed, but their laughter couldn't dispel the unease that clung to me. Days turned into weeks, and the sleep paralysis episodes persisted. Each time, the woman was there, standing at the foot of my bed, urging me to leave. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, I reached out to the landlord. I was guarded, not wanting to come off as insane, but I asked if anyone else had reported strange experiences. He hesitated, then sighed. I don't usually disclose this because people tend to get spooked, but a woman did die in that apartment a long time ago. It's a historical house, and well, it has its stories. I decided to do some research. I spent days digging into the history of the house and its former residents. After scrolling through countless pages of old newspaper archives, I found her, Emily Caldwell, a woman who had lived in my apartment in the late 19th century and died under mysterious circumstances. The black and white photo showed a face I had seen many nights standing at the foot of my bed. The resemblance was uncanny. Terrified but determined, I reached out to a local historian. They confirmed that Emily's death had never been solved, but rumors at the time suggested she had been unhappy in her marriage and might have been planning to leave. Some suspected foul play, though nothing was ever proven. Armed with this knowledge, I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. And when sleep finally took me, the paralysis came as well. Emily was there, as I knew she would be. But this time, I tried to communicate. Through immense struggle, I managed to utter a choked sound, which seemed to catch her attention. "Emily, I know who you are," I managed to whisper through the paralysis. She looked startled, almost as if she too were seeing me for the first time. "I know you're unhappy, but you can't stay here. Neither of us can." For the first time, her stern gaze softened. The next moment, she was gone. I moved out the following week, not wanting to take any more chances. The landlord wasn't surprised, just nodded as if he understood all too well. I found a cramped modern apartment, far less charming but infinitely more peaceful. The sleep paralysis stopped, and Emily never visited me again. Sometimes I still think about her, about the torment that tied her to that place. And I wonder, did telling her story finally set her free? Or did it just make room for her to claim another restless soul? Sleep paralysis is a medically documented phenomenon. You can Google it and you'll find thousands of clinical explanations and personal experiences. But you won't find an explanation for Emily, or for how I heard a voice so clearly during a hallucination. Some things, I've come to realize, defy explanation, and some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. I grew up in a coastal town with a long history of maritime tales and legends, but none as persistent as the story of the old automated lighthouse. Unlike ghost ships or sea monsters, the lighthouse was real, tangible, and still functional. The uncanny part was its inexplicably high rate of malfunctions, unusual for a structure so well maintained by the Coast Guard. I first took interest in it during college while majoring in engineering. The lighthouse was an example in one of our reliability engineering courses, presented as a mysterious outlier in an otherwise predictable system. Intrigued and somewhat arrogant, I thought I could fix whatever kept messing it up. I convinced my professor to make it a semester project for extra credit. With the Coast Guard's permission, I set up monitoring equipment to record data that could explain the mechanical failures. After several uneventful visits, I discovered a rusty metal box hidden behind newer equipment in the control room. Inside, I found a stack of papers protected in plastic sleeves, entries from the original lighthouse keeper's log. The earliest dates went back to the 1920s. The first entries were mundane, reporting on weather conditions and shipping activity. But as I read further, the keeper, named Thomas Grady, started detailing odd malfunctions, light flickers, unexplained temperature drops, and, most intriguingly, occasional static interference on the radio with inaudibly whispered voices. The entry ceased in 1923, right after a particularly distressed note about a ship disappearing into fog even though the lighthouse beam was fully functional. On November 7th, the date of that last log entry, I decided to stay overnight at the lighthouse to monitor my equipment in real time. My focus was on identifying mechanical or electrical issues, but as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. First, I noticed minor temperature fluctuations. Then the static interference Thomas had written about appeared on my modern radio equipment, a low-volume cacophony of inaudible whispers. I started recording the static on my phone. Just after midnight, the lighthouse light flickered. I rushed to my laptop to check the data, but everything seemed normal. No voltage drop or power surges. Puzzled and on edge, I returned to my readings, trying to dismiss what had just happened as coincidence or sensor error. Then my phone, which I'd set to record the static, suddenly stopped. The battery was fully drained. This was a new phone with excellent battery life, and it had been fully charged. No apps had been running other than the recording software. It shouldn't have been dead. A thick fog rolled in just before dawn. As I looked out, I thought I saw a shadowy outline of a ship in the distance. My rational mind insisted it was just a cargo ship or a fishing vessel, but given the events of the night, I couldn't shake off a feeling of dread. I packed up as soon as the sun rose, more than eager to leave. As I was about to walk out, I glanced at the old log one last time, and it struck me. The date was November 7th, exactly 100 years since the last entry was made. Once home, I immediately plugged my phone in. When it turned on, I found that the recording was saved, but was hesitant to play it. When I finally mustered the courage, all I heard was static, until the very end. In the last few seconds, a whispered voice clearly said, "It's not the lighthouse that's broken. Leave." That was enough for me. I submitted a vague report to my professor, citing unresolved electrical issues, and never returned to the lighthouse. Some things, I've come to understand, are better left unexplained. But every year, on November 7th, when local news reports increased sightings of unidentifiable ships near the coast, I'm reminded of the lighthouse keeper's last entry, and I wonder what or who was really causing the malfunctions. I don't usually share this story. There's a part of me that's convinced talking about it will make it real again, like uttering the name of a demon you're trying to avoid. But maybe if I put it out there, in words, it'll lose some of its power over me. First, you have to understand, the story I'm about to tell you is partially backed up by news reports. Somewhere around 2012, in a little town a few hours from here, there was an incident in an abandoned grain silo. It had long been a gathering place for local kids, your typical teenage sanctuary for secret parties, dares, and all sorts of rumors. Then a group of kids went missing, just vanished. No bodies ever found. They closed the place down, put up fences and signs that threatened hefty fines. I never thought much of it until I transferred jobs to a town not too far away. Some co-workers invited me to a local bar, and we got to talking about odd places we'd visited. Naturally, the topic of the abandoned silo came up. Most locals just chalked it up to urban legends and tragedy. But Dan, an older guy in his 50s, looked visibly uncomfortable. I nudged him about it later, and he reluctantly shared his account. Back in his reckless youth, he and some friends had gone to that silo one night, armed with flashlights and teenage bravado. They'd explored almost the entire place, joking and laughing until they reached the top level. There, they found a door with an old, rusty padlock hanging open. Curiosity overwhelming them, they pushed the door open to reveal a room filled with peculiar drawings and etched symbols that none of them could identify. In the center of the room stood a wooden chair, ancient and rotting. And, according to Dan, that chair was bolted to the floor. They all felt a heavy, oppressive feeling in that room, like the air itself was pushing them out. They never spoke of it after that night. Not until years later, when kids started going missing. Dan couldn't shake off the thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd disturbed something back then. His story bothered me. A lot. I knew it wasn't a good idea to go poking around old abandoned places, but something just gnawed at me. I needed to see that room, those drawings. I convinced myself it would be okay if I went during the day. Alone. Besides, I'd bring a camera. Documenting it would make it less scary, right? The day I chose was overcast, chilly for the time of year. I parked my car a distance away to avoid suspicion and trekked through the woods, finding the silo towering menacingly above the trees. I scaled the fence, my heart racing, but pushed on. Inside was, as you'd expect, graffiti, litter, signs of human trespassing. I took photos as I made my way up, floor by floor. Every noise made me jump, but it was just the building settling, or at least that's what I told myself. Finally, I reached the top level. The door with the rusty padlock was ajar, just as Dan had said. I took a deep breath and went in. The room was exactly as he'd described. Drawings, symbols, and that damn wooden chair bolted to the floor. I took out my camera and started snapping photos, trying to steady my trembling hands. That's when I heard it, a whisper, unintelligible, coming from behind me. I whipped around, half expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. The whispering continued, now seeming to emanate from the chair itself. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to approach the chair. The whisper grew louder, a cacophony of voices now, but among them one was clear, a child's voice saying, "Help me." I turned and ran, not stopping until I was out of the silo and over the fence. The entire way home, I felt like something was watching me. I couldn't shake off the feeling for weeks. Every creak of my house, every shadow, my mind was playing tricks on me, I hoped. I finally decided to look at the photos. I uploaded them to my computer, and as I clicked through them, my blood ran cold. The last photo before I'd heard the whispers showed the chair. But in the image, unlike when I was there, the chair wasn't empty. There was a faint outline of a figure seated, almost like a trick of the light, but unmistakably human, a child's shape. I deleted the photos, tried to forget the whole thing, but you can't forget something like that. Even now, years later, I'll catch whispers in quiet rooms or feel a chill when no window is open. It's like I brought something back with me, or maybe it had followed me all along. Go ahead, look up the news reports. You'll find accounts of missing kids, the abandoned silo, and even old legends about the place. But tread carefully. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Before you go double-checking your locks and peering into dark corners, do us a little favor that won't cost you a dime, but keeps our channel alive. Hit that like button if these stories sent shivers down your spine. It helps us know that we're delivering the kinds of scares you crave. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. What was the most terrifying moment for you? Do you have a real-life horror story of your own? Drop your tale in the comments below, and who knows, your story might be the one that haunts our next episode. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That way you'll never miss a chance to tremble in fear with each new story we bring to your screen. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight on Shadowy Screams TV. Remember, the next time you hear something go bump in the night, it might just be one of our stories coming to life. Until next time, sleep tight, or at least try to.